The velocity at which a professional sports franchise's institutional crisis moves from internal documentation to national broadcast coverage is itself a data point. For weeks, the analytical record of what was happening inside the Indiana Fever organization existed primarily in the detailed coverage of outlets like this one. The CBA reporting violations, the contradictory press conference statements, the rotation management failures, the sideline footage. This week, that record crossed a threshold. When CHERYL Miller goes on ESPN and does not hold back, the organization's crisis is no longer a subject of analytical debate among the engaged fan base. It is a national mainstream sports story with prime-time broadcast real estate. The media infrastructure that the Indiana Fever front office has been attempting to manage since the Portland reporting violation has now fully escaped organizational containment. Welcome back, this is WNBA Action, and today we are examining the week's most significant institutional developments in precise analytical sequence, the ESPN segment, and what CHERYL Miller's willingness to speak publicly communicates about the league's internal temperature, the front office social media conduct, and what it reveals about organizational crisis management capacity, the bench footage that forced national coverage, the defensive isolation exploitation that the ESPN crew identified, and the roster construction critique that Whitlock's reporting has put into the mainstream conversation. Each of these elements is documentable. Together, they constitute the most complete single-week indictment of an organizational structure that this season has produced.
Today, tomorrow, Tuesday, Wednesday, and if they lose on Thursday, expect a big time going in from major networks. I'm talking Fox, ESPN, and it's already starting today because CHERYL Miller went on ESPN and she ain't hold nothing back. People been saying that they want CHERYL Miller to be the coach of the Fever. And we got Sue Bird getting in on the action as well. Not only that, we got
CHERYL Miller's decision to address the Indiana Fever situation on ESPN is not a routine media commentary event. Miller occupies a specific position in women's basketball's institutional hierarchy. As a player, as a coach, as a broadcaster, and as a figure whose credibility within the sport is not dependent on any current organizational relationship that would create incentives for restraint. When someone of that standing goes on national television and speaks directly about a franchise's dysfunction, it communicates something specific about the internal consensus that is formed among the people who know this sport most deeply. Public figures with Miller's institutional standing do not create unnecessary organizational friction without a threshold of internal conviction that justifies the exposure. Her willingness to speak is itself information about where the league's informed community has arrived in its assessment of this situation. The fan response calling for Miller's involvement at the coaching level is emotionally understandable given the current environment. But it is worth noting analytically that the significance of her commentary is not contingent on any future organizational role. What matters is what her public characterization of the situation communicates about the breadth of the accountability consensus now forming around this franchise. Sue Bird's engagement with the conversation extends that consensus into a second institutional domain. Bird's post-playing career platform gives her both the credibility and the independence to comment on organizational situations without the constraints that current players and league employees navigate. Two figures of that caliber engaging publicly with the same organizational situation in the same week represents a qualitative shift in the nature of the scrutiny this franchise is under.
A week or two ago, Amber needs to do what Kelly did at this point, and that's leave the internet. If you can't stand in the kitchen, get out. It's too hot for you. The oven might burn your hand. That's how hot it is. And last summer in July, it was too hot for Kelly, and Kelly ain't been back on Twitter since. Kelly, I don't even think Kelly got an Instagram no more. I mean, Kelly is gone. She might not even have Facebook. That's how bad the heat had got for her last.
Amber Cox's documented blocking of Jason Whitlock and other media personalities requires analytical examination as an organizational crisis management decision, not as a personal social media choice. When an executive of a professional sports franchise, one that is currently the subject of national broadcast coverage of its dysfunction, uses her official or publicly associated social media accounts to block journalists and commentators who are covering that dysfunction, the action communicates specific information to the stakeholder audience observing it. It communicates that the organization's response to critical external coverage is restriction of that coverage's reach rather than engagement with its substance. It communicates that the executive responsible for the blocking action has concluded that the criticism being blocked is not addressable through factual correction, because factual correction, where available, is always the superior crisis management response to inaccurate coverage. And it communicates an organizational posture toward accountability that is consistent with the press conference language patterns, the reporting compliance conduct, and the public statement management that this channel has documented across the full season. The Kelly Crosskop precedent Cox is now replicating. The documented pattern of an Indiana Fever executive retreating from public digital presence under fan and media pressure is not a coincidence of individual personality. It is an organizational culture pattern. Organizations whose leadership responds to accountability pressure by restricting rather than engaging produce that pattern consistently because the culture permits and implicitly endorses it. The blocking conduct is a symptom of an organizational culture that has not developed the institutional capacity for transparent public accountability that professional sports at this commercial level requires.
From what you're seeing, what's happening in Indianapolis?
Right now, it's frustration, and unfortunately, it's boiling over and it's being seen. It's one thing to have it behind closed doors, but when it spills over and when the coach has to basically say, hey, you know what, Caitlin, enough is enough. This is too disruptive. In and out, take a seat. What do you think?
I agree. I think it's frustration. I'm not like the best lip reader, but I feel like Stephanie White did say defense a couple times.
Now,
the ESPN segment's framing of the season arc, a 4-2 start, followed by consecutive losses and a 16-point blowout defeat to a first-year expansion franchise, is the narrative structure that national broadcast audiences are now receiving as their primary introduction to this organizational situation. The 4-2 start is relevant context because it establishes that the roster's talent level is capable of winning. The subsequent collapse is relevant context because it establishes that the talent level alone is insufficient to overcome the structural and organizational factors that have produced the losing streak. That framing, talent present, structural failure producing losses, is the analytically accurate characterization of what the game film and the organizational record document. Its appearance in ESPN's primetime coverage means it is now the lens through which the casual national sports audience is processing the Indiana Fever's season. The organizational communication challenge this creates for the front office is not manageable through press conference language or social media blocking. It is only manageable through results and documented behavioral change. Neither of those is currently visible. The lip-reading interpretation of White's bench communication with Clark requires analytical restraint. Lip-reading from broadcast footage is not a reliable evidentiary standard. What can be documented without that uncertainty is the visual characterization of the interaction, the physical proximity, the visible emotional intensity of the coaching staff's communication posture, and Clark's visible response to it. Those elements are in the footage. The specific words are not confirmable from the available visual record, and responsible analysis does not present unconfirmable interpretations as established fact. What the footage does document, reliably and without interpretive uncertainty, is a sideline interaction whose visual character is consistent with the pattern of coaching staff Clark interactions that have been captured across multiple games this season. The pattern is the analytically significant element. Individual interactions within it are expressions of that pattern.
I made a video and I said, Stephanie White said, get the F out my face. If you guys read her lips, she definitely swerved at Caitlin, like cursed at her, bro. It looked that way. Now, I could be wrong. I very much could be wrong. But it definitely looked like she's cursing at Caitlin Clark, scolding her almost like she's a damn child. And if I'm Caitlin Clark, mom, I am pissed. I am pissed. I damn near want to have a conversation with Kelly off the record. Don't you ever talk to my daughter like that. If I'm Mr. Clark, Clark, don't you ever in your mind think about you finna talk to mine.
The characterization of White's sideline communication posture toward Clark, independent of the specific words used, raises a workplace conduct question that the Indiana Fever ownership is institutionally obligated to evaluate. Professional sports franchises are workplaces. The conduct standards that govern how coaching staff communicate with players are not categorically different from the conduct standards that govern how managers communicate with employees in any professional environment. When that communication is visually documented on multiple occasions in a manner that a reasonable observer would characterize as inappropriate in terms of proximity, intensity, and visible emotional dysregulation, the organization that employs both parties has a documented obligation to respond. The ownership group has now seen the same footage the national broadcast audience has seen. Their evaluation of it, and the organizational decision that evaluation produces or fails to produce, is itself a documented organizational choice.
You know, Kelsey Mitchell kind of chimed in and said, like, you need to go stand over here and let us just, like, you know, regain the calm and when it becomes that disruptive to the entire team, somebody has to step in.
Well, that's my question for both of you, because you've played on teams where they're high.
So Kelsey Mitchell definitely got in on it, told her to go stand over there. Bro, what? Kayla need to get the hell out of Indy, bro.
Expectations, you know what that pressure can be like. Are these moments actually impacting their ability?
The reported Kelsey Mitchell bench interaction, in which Mitchell is characterized as directing Clark away from the confrontation rather than toward it, requires the same evidentiary restraint as the lip-reading question. The specific content of bench conversations during live game situations is not confirmable from broadcast footage alone. What can be analytically examined is the broader team dynamic question that the reported interaction surfaces. The competitive cohesion of a professional basketball roster, the trust architecture that produces collective defensive commitment, transition execution, and late-game decision-making is directly affected by the visibility and management of internal friction. When bench interactions between teammates during live game moments are being interpreted nationally as expressions of internal division, the team's competitive cohesion has a documented external perception problem regardless of the specific content of any individual interaction. Managing that perception and the underlying reality it may or may not reflect is a coaching staff and front office responsibility that the current organizational record suggests is not being effectively executed. The defensive isolation exploitation that ESPN's crew identified is the analytical dimension of this situation that has the most direct and actionable competitive implication. The pattern is documentable. Opposing teams identified that Clark can be targeted in isolation situations to generate foul trouble and physical fatigue. The Golden State Valkyries were the first team to systematically execute this approach. It has since been adopted as a league-wide blueprint because the game film from those games is available to every coaching staff in the WNBA. Clark's foul trouble across multiple recent games, including the 5-foul performance in Portland, is not coincidental. It is the predictable outcome of a targeted defensive strategy that the Fever's coaching staff has not yet developed a consistent counter to. The counter requires two things that are within the coaching staff's design authority. First, off-ball screening action that changes Clark's catch points, receiving the ball in motion off screens rather than standing still as an isolation target. Second, rotational defensive support that reduces her one-on-one exposure in situations where the isolation targeting is occurring. Both of these are system design decisions. Neither requires personnel the Fever do not have. What they require is a coaching staff that has diagnosed the opponent's blueprint and designed a specific response to it. The absence of that response across multiple games is the analytical indictment.
Live, man, y'all gotta go look at it. So then he went on to say these four women put the alphabet mafia agenda above basketball business. Your personal life should be your personal life. It should not be your business. These four women think fans are watching and paying thousands of dollars for tickets to see them, not Caitlin Clark. That's a problem. Exactly, bro. Those four women are the culprit behind what we're seeing take place in Indianapolis. And what's crazy is that court size tickets is like $2-3 grand right now. Like, I ain't gonna lie to you, bro. I've been looking. They're like $2-3 grand.
Whitlock's roster construction critique, the $800,000 Monique Billings commitment specifically, is now in the national media mainstream and deserves analytical examination on its specific merits. Billings was brought in as an interior presence that the Fever's roster construction identified as a need. Her documented production through the games she has played, 8 minutes and limited impact in the most recent game, has not validated that identification in competitive terms. The gap between the resource commitment and the production output is a front office evaluation question. The broader roster construction critique that the off-season investment did not produce the specific personnel complement that Clark's play style requires to be maximally effective is analytically supportable from the game film. The secondary creation deficit, the off-ball movement limitations, the interior screen setting consistency that pick-and-roll execution demands, these are all roster construction variables that the off-season decisions did not fully address. Whitlock's characterization of the off-season as a wasted opportunity is consistent with what the game film documents about the current roster's structural limitations. His framing of the organizational priority question, executives who have elevated their own decision-making visibility above the competitive product, is the sharpest version of an accountability argument that the documented record supports. The commercial reality is precise and not overstated. Courtside tickets in Indianapolis are commanding $2,000, $3,000 specifically because of the player those tickets enable attendance to watch. The organizational decisions that affect that player's availability, health, competitive environment, and extension likelihood are not separable from the commercial reality those ticket prices represent. Every front office decision that degrades Clark's institutional situation is a decision that degrades the commercial asset those ticket prices are priced against. The ownership group's accountability window is now defined not by the regular season schedule, but by the convergence of two timelines: the national media coverage that is now in full acceleration and Clark's contract evaluation that is proceeding in parallel. Both timelines are compressing simultaneously. The organizational decision that addresses both is the same one, and it is fully within the ownership group's authority to make. This is WNBA Action. Subscribe now and activate notifications for the complete coverage of the organizational response and the Atlanta Dream game as they develop. Leave your analytically grounded assessment in the comments. Does the convergence of CHERYL Miller's ESPN commentary, the front office's documented blocking conduct, and the national broadcast coverage of the bench footage constitute the complete accountability threshold that forces the ownership group's hand? And does the isolation exploitation blueprint that every team in the league has now adopted represent a solvable system design problem or a personnel limitation that the current roster cannot address? Every informed perspective in that comment section matters. We will see you when the response comes.